Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Team CASA, I, Lieutenant General Gautam Murthy, the founder of CASA, welcome you all to this very important webinar of ours, our 32nd so far, on choppy seas around Taiwan, China's belligerent behavior and its implications on the world. As Chinese missiles landed in the seas around Taiwan, aircraft flying around it and a ship sailing all over, as President Xi and other Chinese leaders made all sorts of threatening statements promising brimstone and fire, the world watched with bated breath and crossed fingers as it tried to figure out the implications of the Chinese over-the-top reaction to the visit of Nancy Pelosi and her delegation. Beijing's belligerence, many likened to Nazi Germany's irredentist behavior in trying to alter the status quo in Europe in the last century. It appears that both leaders, Biden and Xi, with their eyes firmly on the domestic audience, were ready to up the ante. Who threw the gauntlet first? Was it Biden's USA, which had to be seen as not buckling to Chinese pressure? Or was it Xi's China that blew out of proportion the visit of an American senior politician to Taiwan? Going forward, what will be the implications of China's belligerent reaction worldwide and on Taiwan in particular? To answer these and many other questions, we have with us a very eminent panel. Our first speaker of the evening is Professor Eugene Kuo from Taiwan. Professor Kuo is the director for the Center of Japanese Studies in the National Sun Yat-sen University, Taiwan, and Professor Institute of China and Asia Pacific Studies in the same university. He is also Secretary General, Taiwan Society of Japan Study, the Director, Institute for Policy Research, and the professor earned his PhD from the Department of Political Science, University of Southern California. His areas of expertise are Japanese politics and economy, industrial policy, the defense policy, US-Japan relations, and military alliance security issues in the Northeast. Dr. Kuo will speak to us on Taiwan's perspective, action taken, likely future course of action, along with likely outcomes and implications. We welcome you, Professor Kuo, and we in India look forward very eagerly to hear from you on how China's belligerence is being perceived in Taiwan. Our next speaker is Lieutenant General Dr. Prakash Menon, PVSM, AVSM, VSM. General Menon is the director of the Strategic Studies Program of the Takshashila Institution, Bangalore. He is also Professor Emeritus at the Transdisciplinary University, Bangalore, and an adjunct professor at National University of Advanced Studies. General Menon joined the Indian Army in 1972. He has extensive operational experience in commanding counterinsurgency operations in Kashmir. He was the Major General Staff of the Army's Northern Command, responsible for operations in J&K, and retired as a Commandant of the National Defense College, New Delhi. After retirement, he continued in government as a military advisor and secretary to the Government of India, and from 2015 as officer on special duty in the National Security Council Secretariat. He has a PhD from Madras University for his thesis, Limited War and Nuclear Deterrence in the Indo-Pak Context. Post-retirement, the general continues to teach and research with a special focus on the role of force in statecraft. General Menon will give us an assessment of China's perspective, action taken, likely future course of action, along with likely outcomes. We welcome you, sir, and we look forward to hearing your views. Our third speaker is Vice Admiral Anil Chopra, PVSM, AVSM. Admiral Chopra is a former Commander-in-Chief of both the operational commands of the Indian Navy, that is the Western Naval Command and the Eastern Naval Command, as well as a former Director General of the Indian Coast Guard. He had earlier commanded the Western Fleet and the aircraft carrier INS Virat. He was also Assistant Chief of Naval Staff Policy and Plans, and before that was Principal Director Naval Plans. As DG Indian Coast Guard, he was also a member of the Apex Defense Acquisition Council for 3 years. After retirement, he was a member of the National Security Advisory Board. He's been a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in the US Admiral Chopra will be speaking to us on global and regional implications of the turmoil around Taiwan, including the role of the US, regional countries, that's Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Vietnam, and so on, and organizations like ASEAN, Quad, AUKUS, as also what are the options for India. Our moderator for this webinar is none other than Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, who has studied China very deeply and extensively and writes regularly on what is happening in China and with China. General Shankar is a retired Director General of the Artillery. He has held many important command and staff and instructional appointments in the Army and has had vast operational experience, having served in all kinds of terrain and operational situations which has confronted the Indian Army. He gave great impetus to the modernization of the Indian artillery through indigenization. General Shankar is now a professor of practice in the Aerospace Department of IIT Madras. He is actively involved in applied research and writes and speaks extensively on strategic issues. He has his own blog called Gunner's Shot, which is very widely read across 70 countries, including China and Pakistan. He gets an average of 2,000 hits per day and has crossed an all-time readership of 2.35 million. His interviews on YouTube too are closely followed, and he has recorded a viewership of over 500,000. He has written over 150 articles on China and the Sino-Indian conflict alone. You have nobody better than him to moderate this webinar. I welcome you, General Shankar, and hand over the floor to you to get the ball rolling. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks for that generous introduction. Good evening to all the panelists. Good evening to all the viewers. Welcome to the Choppy Seas Around Taiwan. That's how best I can describe the situation there, because I leave the wiser words to our eminent panel. But, you know, there's a very interesting phase of history we are living through. We've come out of 2 years of COVID. Then we saw the Ukraine war 4 months back. We thought it will finish off in 4 days. It's now into the 5th month or the 6th month. In between, inflation is roiling everyone. Rivers are running dry. That's how hot the world is. And all this, Taiwan has taken off. One old lady, 80 plus, has stirred the waters of Taiwan, and she's made it a whole lot choppy there. But then this has got long-term implications. We all know that. While it per se it could involve only China, Taiwan, and US, but the regional countries get sucked in, and once the regional countries get sucked in, we are also, virtually there. And if you see in the past, almost in the same parallel time frame at what's going on in Taiwan, a lot of things have happened along the LAC. You had near air violations. The 16th round of Corps Commanders talks went, flat. Then you saw reports of high-altitude long-range firing by the PLA. They're all demonstration drills. Now, of course, we are all agog with the Yuan Wang 5, which is sitting in Sri Lanka. And then India took that great step of almost disregarding, or rather going quiet on One China, for which as a journalist put it to me, it put the ants up Chinese pants, right? And it evoked a reaction from them. The ambassador was very next day, he was, addressing a press conference, very concerned. So whatever happens in that part of the world is going to affect India and the larger world. Now, this is the backdrop. I'll not, waste or eat into time of the panelists. The format we'll follow is each panelist will get about 12 minutes to talk. We'll get about at about 10 minutes, I'll give them a reminder, or one of my friends will give a reminder. We wind up at about 12 minutes. I'll not interfere in between. I'll not sum up. Once everyone finishes, I'll get back again and I'll, put across points, and then we'll take the questions. I would request those of you who are already fast on the gun, audience, please start putting in your questions so that I can compile them, make a sensible question at the end and put it across. So that's how it is. And we'll probably ask 2 to 3 questions per, speaker, depending on how the time goes. With this, I'd request Professor Eugene Kuo to join us from Taiwan and take over. And this is the second time he's coming on the CASA panel, and it's indeed an honor for us that we could host him here. Sun Yat-sen University is one of the oldest universities of Taiwan. Actually, Sun Yat-sen is the founder of modern China, which includes the People's Republic of China, just to give a backdrop, right? And who better than him to tell us how choppy the seas are in Taiwan? Professor, all yours, the sea is all yours. We can't hear you. I think your mic is...
Thank you so much, Chair, for your very kind introduction. And I'm very honored to be invited again to attend this CASA forum, a very important event. So because I only have 12 minutes, so I will just go directly into my topic. I want to share my PowerPoint. Can you see my PowerPoint well?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to start from this cover page. I usually spend lots of time selecting a proper cover page for the topic. So this is the cartoon drawn after the G7 and NATO summit in this June. And you could see that Biden is riding on horse, going nowhere, and with a flag, anti-China and Russia alliance. The flag is flying backward rather than forward. I mean, if the horse is riding forward, the flag should be riding backward. But if you are seeing that flag is riding forward, meaning the horse itself is riding backward, and the very reluctant stance from the two Europeans. Yeah, so that's the best description of Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan on August 2nd, and I will introduce the reason why. My main content, 6 points. First of all, Pelosi's visit to Taiwan on U.S.-China relation. Second of all, this Chinese simulating invasion to Taiwan. And third point is 2 missing missiles. And number 4 is U.S.-China understanding, mutual understanding of the Chinese military exercises surrounding Taiwan. Number 5 is China's rapid naval expansion. Lastly, I will report to you Taiwan's strategy to deal with the incoming challenges from China. So the logic of Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan is very simple, because after this G7 and NATO summit, after Biden went to those 2 summits, he got very high pressure from European countries to terminate or to suspend Ukraine war, hopefully before late September, before the winter comes. Since Putin has been threatening to cut off natural gas supply to Europe. So that was the challenge Biden was facing when he was at Europe. After returning back to DC, the overall consideration of Biden's China policy started to shake out of the energy consideration, food supply consideration, and also inflation, and not to mention also Ukraine war. So starting from late June to early July, the vice chairman of China, Wang Qishan, started to communicate with Barack Obama. Don't be surprised to hear the names. That's how the story went. The major driving force for Nancy Pelosi's motivation to visit Taiwan. So Nancy Pelosi was not visiting Asia. Her major purpose is to visit Taiwan. Having said that, Nancy Pelosi met our President Tsai Ing-wen at Taiwan, and also visited our Congress. And most importantly, he also visited Taiwan's Human Rights Park. And then she met representatives from Tibet government, from Xinjiang representative, and also one very famous human rights fighter from Hong Kong, and also one Taiwanese was illegally detained in China, Li Mingzhe. So Pelosi intentionally planned this visit to Taiwan's Human Rights Park and met all these 4 representatives in waking up this key war in U.S.-China relations, missing for more than 2 decades since the 2000 U.S.-China Relations Act during Bill Clinton's term. There is no more human rights discussion between U.S. and China. So that's the whole story. And my second part will introduce you the simulating invasion from China to Taiwan. So there are 3 major steps. First step is, of course, missile attack. Second step is air and sea power. And the third one is amphibious attacks. So if you look at the map of Taiwan, the yellow lines you could see on the map is the ideal locations, beaches for Chinese to land on Taiwan. And those 3 locations are very well defended by our military. So if you compare the last graph with this one, these 6 zones China declared for the military exercise all the way from August 4th to the 8th. So those 6 zones representing very different military logic. The first one in the medium line in Taiwan Strait, that's the main purpose for Chinese PLA's military activities. They want to invalidate this so-called medium line between Taiwan and China. And the 2 zones, the one in the north, outside Keelung Harbor, is one of the major harbors of Taiwan. And the other one in the south, outside Kaohsiung Harbor, the largest harbor of Taiwan, and also the largest naval base. Those 2 are for testing Taiwan's military preparation and reaction. And the 2 in the east coast of Taiwan, those 2 are for stopping US and Japan for any possible intervention when China invades Taiwan. Lastly, the last zone in Bass Strait in the south of Taiwan, the one that's decorated, that's for just testing the reaction from the international community. As we all know, Bass Strait is one of the busiest communication channel in the world. So, and it occupies more than 80% of all trade, communication channel in Indo-Pacific region. So I don't think China could realistically conduct any kind of military activities in Bass Strait. So this is a simple list of China's military exercises in June, July, and August. So this is just for your information. And China's warship and drone activities during August 4th to 8th, as you can see from this graph. This little circle is their destroyer and the vessels tracks and routes. And the dot lines here is the drone they released. So in the night of August 4th, China planned launched 16 missiles, but Taiwan detected 11. Japan detected 9 missiles. I will explain the reason why later. And those are, the sequence of how China launch is a missile attack to these military zones. From 1 to 9, you can see that's from Japanese Ministry of Defense. And that's another graph. Is mainly DF-15B ballistic missile. So I will talk about why there are two missing missiles. Chinese claimed 16, Taiwan detected 11, but Japan only got 9. Because it's very simple. Chinese number of 16, there are 5 artillery rockets shooting at the medium line of Taiwan Strait. So that's the reason why Japanese radars couldn't detect those 5 artillery rockets. And Japan only got 9 DF-15B shooting at the north and south of Taiwan. But where are the other 2 missing missiles? Taiwan has the best warning radars in Asia, probably in the world as well. The PEV-POW radar stationing at Hsinchu, Leshan, at the latitude of 2,600 meters. And it could detect more than 3,000 kilometers, as you can see from the map. Those 2 missing missiles, from the best to our best knowledge, we believe it is the first time the China tested these DF-17 hypersonic gliding missiles. That's the reason why Japanese radars could not detect those 2 DF-17. And the purpose of the military exercise, again, number 1 is simulating invasion to Taiwan by 3 major steps. And second purpose is to invalidate the medium line of Taiwan Strait, Taiwan's ADIZ, and Taiwan's 36 nautical miles defense zone. And number 3 purpose is to semi-blockade the import of energy and food in order to create internal struggle and chaos in Taiwan. Number 4, to test Taiwan's surveillance radar capability, air and sea preparation. Number 5, to test US and Japan, especially US forces in Okinawa's reaction. Lastly, to test the reactions from international community. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about US-China understanding. I believe there is a very obvious understanding.
Finish in about 2 minutes.
Okay. Between US and China, if you see how Ronald Reagan is moving, here, August 4th, it is Ronald Reagan is actually kind of distant from Taiwan. And at the same time, the US government holds Taiwanese military to hold still. And that's the reason why Chinese PLA vessels got very close within the 24 nautical miles of Taiwan. That's the first time in the east coast of Taiwan. And since I only got 2 minutes, I will very quickly. This is how China is being, expanding its air and naval capabilities and capacity surrounding Japan and Taiwan. And lastly, I will talk about Taiwan's countermeasures or strategy. Number 1, Taiwan lies in one of the very important slots, seasonal communication, and as you can see, the red circle here. Number 2, Taiwan is going to highly concentrate advanced manufacturing of semiconductor in Taiwan. In the coming 4 years, TSMC is going to set up 18 new factories, all with advanced manufacturing, all the way from 6 nano to 2 nano. And Taiwan now is establishing itself as a missile island. We got 400 Harpoon missiles from the States, and we have ground-to-ship missiles very close to 700, and cruise missiles more than 700 cruise missiles. So that's we will not try to compare our naval capacity with China. It's going to be stupid, but we need to deter them. And my conclusion page, 2024 to 2027 is the most challenging to Taiwan. As you know, Xi Jinping's third term is from 23 to 27. 28 to 30 China will reach the top of its overall national power. But the problem is China will also step in aging society. 2028, China will have more than 20% of population older than 65, and it will cause a large shortage of labor. And Chinese economy will start to stagnate and force China to do internal resources redistribution, and it will cause internal struggle of Chinese Communist Party. And 2024 will be the year Taiwan and United States will have new presidents. So our prediction, simple, 2024 to 2027, before the decline of overall national power, Xi Jinping will try to do something to Taiwan. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Ko. That was very nice. I'll reserve my comments at this point of time. We'll jump across the straits and we'll get into China and we'll see what the Chinese perspective is. I'd request General Prakash Menon, my Commandant NDC, to kindly take over. Please go ahead, sir. Your 10 minutes, your 12 minutes, I'll give you a call at 10. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. And thank you for the honor, Kasa. China is not concealing its intentions on Taiwan anymore because of the fact that it finds that it has grown in power and therefore in strength. So what has happened in Taiwan cannot be seen simply by itself, but I think within the larger context of the global struggle and the opposition China sees it facing to actually realize its dream from the US-led allies. It is in that context that China's reaction to what has happened in Taiwan has to be seen. China could not possibly have not reacted to the visit. It had warned about the visit earlier. It left itself no elbow room to actually keep from doing nothing. In fact, it pushed itself deliberately into a place whereby its actions post the visit and because of the visit would instill in the minds of the Taiwanese leaders and what it sees are the main opposition to what is its fundamental right about uniting China. Because it has a case that the United Nations itself and the international world order after the Second World War and the acceptance of People's Republic of China as the only China, the legitimate China, and it sees Taiwan as a renegade state which must be brought under its control. So it is made sure that it accomplishes this. Previously, it used to say through peaceful means, but now it is explicitly stating that if necessary, it will also use force. The perception is that as long as China can ensure that the US-led alliance is weakened and split, and their reaction to Chinese moves on Taiwan are stymied, there is a distinct possibility that they can achieve the reunification of Taiwan. But what has happened also, and this is what the interconnected world is, that the Chinese must be taking their lessons from the war in Ukraine, the inability of the big guy to just walk over the small guy, that air power and missiles have got highly photogenic power and the power to impress. But if one were to actually take control of territory, even an island territory, it also means taking control of the people. And what it must have probably realized is that unless it can intimidate the Taiwanese to come to an understanding so that the reunification can be peacefully achieved. But what it must have learned from the lessons of its own actions is all it seemed to have served is that the Taiwanese are more united, that the US and its allies are showing much greater cohesive powers to oppose any military moves. But that does not mean that China will step back. In fact, it will step forward in smaller steps. And this is what we need to actually understand. As the professor from Taiwan has already made out, the weakening of an informal line like the medium line in the Straits has already been done. It was already in progress by constant violation of the ADIZ, the medium line. So the China will actually weaken those lines which they have not crossed before, but it will do it over a period of time and in such a way that it cannot be opposed, because it is not too much which will call in for use of force by either Taiwan or by the Western allies. And this is exactly how China's operating style is. While intimidation requires that you threaten, that you fire missiles, that you carry out these maneuvers, China knows very well that an invasion is a completely different ball game. But that does not mean that it will give up what it is very good at doing. That is the sort of salami slicing it has been doing now for several decades. So the Taiwanese reaction will be one in which there would be avoidance on force meeting force, warnings being issued, with always the danger being there of accidents taking place. But those risks we must expect that the Chinese would take. But to see the Chinese future actions purely in terms of a global power struggle, I think would also be myopic to what is happening in the domestic politics of China, where Xi Jinping is about, in a couple of months' time, to make himself the president for life, where he needs to show his domestic supporters about the strong arm methods that he can use and is prepared to use to achieve what every Chinese probably feels is their right, the reunification. I think that emotional appeal to the Chinese are not going to go away. But that is opposed, and I presume the professor would agree, by also a simultaneous uplift in the opposition that Taiwan is willing to put up. And that is the problem China cannot easily overcome. So threats, pushing the envelope, trying to draw new lines, trying to split the larger US opposition would be China's way of keeping Taiwan alive. But I would think that the Chinese would think several times before they actually launch what they are keeping as a threat in being an invasion of the island. I would agree with the professor that China is also running short of time. And that would probably be a danger going forward in the risk which China is willing to take. But what China would look for are opportunities on which it can capitalize. That the US and its allies are distracted, either because of man-made causes or because of natural reasons, disasters and so on, and whether they can utilize those opportunities which it perceives by a quick takeover, which it would imagine may succeed. But
Couple of minutes more, sir.
Yes, it would be a risk which Xi Jinping, in my view, would not take, for the simple reason that the risk is too much, and as long as his power internally is not threatened by forces opposed to him, why would he like to take that risk? Because that risk itself might bring about his own downfall. So paradoxically, we see an authoritarian leadership actually being the cause of or delaying or resisting what in purely military terms is a possibility. And when we talk about military possibilities, we must be very clear that no plan can withstand the first strike. And normally, we only talk about what happens about who strikes first and what is taken out. We hardly ever talk about what happens after that. And that is always unpredictable. It is on that unpredictability, I say, that threats will continue, intimidation will continue, but an invasion is not going to be a possibility unless China finds that the rest of the world is distracted. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. A lot of important points you've made, but I'll reserve my comments at this point of time. I think I'll put across these points later and we'll discuss it. Now we'll go away from the Taiwan Straits. There are a whole lot of nations, starting from South Korea, Japan, Philippines, and Vietnam. Any ship movement, look, whatever China has done is a one-sided affair. But any movement there, plus the US fleets moving around, will invite all these people in, and it will provoke reactions farther away in the South China Sea and further south. To give you the outer dimension of this whole affair, and how US is likely to react, how the Quad is likely to react, what will be our reactions, how will it affect India? I'll invite Admiral Chopra to carry on, sir. 10 plus 2 is what we'll go ahead. I know it's short for a wide panorama, but that's how it is.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Delighted as always to be on CASA. I hope you can all hear me. Well, the seas are certainly choppy around Taiwan. The only question is, will they get choppier or will they calm down? Will China invade or not? As other panelists and General Menon have said, the chances of invasion are pretty paltry for very many reasons. And therefore, actually, it's not a threatened being. I would disagree with that. I can come to that a little later. But, to look at this whole issue, let's step back a little bit to February before the Russian invasion. It was China who actually threw down the gauntlet to the Western powers, publicly allying itself with Russia in that famous meeting on February 4th. It challenged the West outside the confines of the Pacific, brought about an Eurasian sort of alliance, and gave everybody serious concern. In my view, the visit of Pelosi to Taiwan was a stratagem which has played itself out well for America and its allies. In the sense, and I'm quite surprised that somebody like Xi Jinping, or Chinese for that matter, fell for this stratagem. Because by reacting so violently, he fell into the trap. Because what can you do but threaten invasion? And you know very well, and so does the rest of the world, that invasion is not possible. So we have a situation of all bluster and no action, and tremendous loss of face already. So now what does China do? Invade? Not likely. So how does he save face? That is the question. And that's a worrying question. Because to survive the Congress, Xi Jinping has to save face, which has already been lost. That could happen in many ways, one more dangerous than the other. Or it could happen that in his old age, he backs off and tones down and gets his third term and becomes a little bit less aggressive. That's also possible, and not to be laughed away. But, the invasion is not only not likely because of the military reasons, but because of the many other conundrums that China faces, which all of us know about. The economy, the rising dissent, the issues with the Pacific, Indo-Pacific, Japan, South Pacific, and many other things, which are now coming to a head as far as China is concerned. I am not, I think most people would know that. I don't think the China narrative is powerful. It lays down dates. By so-and-so will be so-and-so. By so-and-so will be so-and-so. Everybody in the world goes by that date and puts it up on a slide. But that date is only a narrative that the Chinese have given, and not necessarily what is likely to happen. In my view, China is in a precarious position. And remember, these sort of regimes are pretty brittle, and it requires a crack, and then the whole situation can change. So it's not a forever scenario. We don't have to push everything into the 30s and 40s. Let's focus on the 20s. And much can happen in the 20s before China becomes the #1 power in the world in 2049, as the Chinese dream and narrative say. Okay, let's get back to Taiwan. There was nothing happened except a few missiles were fired over the island into the sea, excited Japan, excited Taiwan. But the whole world and military observers at least dispassionately saw that nothing much is really happening, except, as General Menon pointed out, that continuous exercises of this nature will set a new normal, will cause operational fatigue, but will also improve operational readiness on the part of Taiwan and give away a fair amount of intelligence of Chinese weapons, tactics, and other reasons. Also, it's a twin-edged sword, and it will tire China out also. So how long can this saber rattling carry on? I don't think it will carry on very long, but it will certainly carry on for the next few months. And there's one more thing besides the Congress. There's G20 on 31st of October in Indonesia, of all places, with Biden and Xi and Putin likely to meet or not meet. I'm sure the Chinese leadership has that in mind. And shortly after that, somewhere in November, the dates are not out, is the Congress. And as everywhere else in the world, the primary concern of the ruling elite is to stay in power. Taiwan and everything else can wait if their power is threatened. So my view, nothing is going to happen. There's going to be saber rattling, seas will remain choppy, but not much else will happen. It's important to underline very short, very briefly, why it's militarily more or less impossible to invade Taiwan. Normandy was 20 kilometers, 20 miles across. This is 130 miles in an age of transparent battle space. There's no way a fleet can get together on the Chinese coast and make its way through 130 miles of sea where there's every chance of opposition and intervention. No way. The only way it can be done is by air envelopment, and that also is very risky. All in all, as everyone agrees, even if they were to invade, the costs in terms of lives, ships, aircraft would be so heavy and so much on the world screens, a la Ukraine, and probably worse, that it is just not possible to take that risk. So now China is in a situation where it can't really invade, it can't really back off, so it'll mumble along for a while, and then slowly this will resolve through some other stratagem. And hopefully that stratagem will not be a violent one, like something in the Himalayas or otherwise. Anyway, let me come to my brief a little bit about why, before I do that, there are 4 reasons why the invasion can take place, even though militarily it is very unlikely or difficult. One is if there is political desperation. If we don't know, no one knows what's happening in the Chinese Communist Party, in the politics of it. So if she gets desperate, if he's being threatened by others, then you could have this irrational paradigm where you go in for the invasion despite knowing it won't succeed. Or you go in because you want legacy and you know your time is running short. Or you go in for practical reasons before it becomes impossible due to the changing and relative power equations. Or worse, if Taiwan declares independence against very many odds, but if it declares independence, it forces China's hand. China will have to invade. Now just think about that. It's a strategy which is there in the background. If the Taiwanese declare independence, it will lead to a forced invasion with all the consequences. China knows that, so does Taiwan, so does the US. Okay, what has been the response to the drills? Because all that's happened after Pelosi's visit is drills. On the other hand, another group of senators visited Taiwan just last week, and the US started trade talks with Taiwan. All that is carrying on pretty much as life goes on, and showing China that the bluster is that much bluster. And this is getting them angry, and that is worrying because brinkmanship may lead to miscalculation as always. But the Americans are starting freedom of navigation operations, as they usually do, through the Taiwan Strait, slated starting next month. And there is a continuous input say that visits to Taiwan by American lawmakers will continue. But Japan is one of China's big conundrums. China knows only well the potential might of its neighbor, so far limited by its constitution, self-imposed. But the way China is carrying on, in tandem with Russia and the Kuril Islands, in tandem with North Korea, and now with Taiwan, the LDP and its allies now have 2/3 majority in the Diet. And Article 9 is again being debated as we speak. Abe's push for it has brought it to public debate. If Japan removes its moratorium on militarization and even nuclearization, then China knows it has another situation. The Chinese have said that these missiles which drop in the EEZ, the Japanese have said, it's not a joke, they've protested, and they're starting to make noise in the legislature. So Japan and America have responded as they would have thought. But let's look at it, what else is happening, and I'll just point out a few things. Indonesia, linchpin of ASEAN, last week conducted the biggest Indonesia-US exercise, Super Garuda 2022, where India was an observer and 7 countries participated. Indonesia. So equations are changing in ASEAN. Later this year in Australia, there is, what is the exercise? It's called Pitch Black 2022. Again, India participating. 17 air forces, including everybody except North Korea and a few other people in this region. This is all happening post-Taiwan, slated earlier, but very much going on. So it won't be lost on the CCP leadership. Xi Jinping is powerful, but he's not the CCP leadership. And we have seen time and again in Russia and Soviet Union and earlier in China, how the strongest leaders have been removed when the party feels that he's doing more harm than good to China or the party. So I think the outcome of this Congress is far from certain as far as I'm concerned. It is very uncertain to me whether Xi will get a third term, and if he does, he may have to adopt a different avatar. South Korean planes landed in Taiwan last week. Germans flew past. The Germans, in a deployment from Germany. NATO is coming into the picture. UK and France are already there, AUKUS, etc. Now the Germans. Chinese rebuffed in South Pacific. Australians, in any case, protested. So this is not going to be lost on the CCP or on Chinese, if not the people, but at least the people in power. Very precarious situation, as I see it. The response has been quite major.
Could you wind up?
Yeah, just 2 minutes more.
Yeah.
I'll just do, what has he done? From a status quo in which China was quite happy when the Taiwanese, he was trying to intervene in Taiwanese politics, encouraging fifth columnists, etc., etc., doing long-term dredging. There's a plan China has to dredge and get the Taiwan straits to come. All that was the long-term Taiwan plan. And now you have a situation where Taiwan is back against the wall, sympathy and support, upping its military, upping its alliances, getting new submarines, getting new fighters. I don't see what has been achieved as far as China is concerned. India, before I conclude, India remains as it always has. I think this audience knows it only too well. I'm only saying we have remained hedging, building bridges on all sides. My worry always is, when does it become a bridge too far? And that is something I think we all have to think about. Lack of taking a stand doesn't give gravitas to anybody. Eventually, you have to take a stand. You might say, no, it's very smart, Chanakya. We have a stratagem. It's, strategic sort of ambiguity. But we must look at our stance all over again. After all, this is finally a struggle between two authoritarian giants and a so-called democratic world, but it is. And we claim to be, and we push our own democracy. And I think it's for us to see how much and where can we strike a balance between the struggle underway. I won't say much on India on that, except that the Himalayan situation will have to be carefully watched. There is an irrationality paradigm, as I said. Leaders and nations don't act rationally. So all I've said may appear rational, but what may be done may be completely irrational. And that is something we need to worry about a lot. In the end, I will conclude by again saying that nothing much will happen in these choppy waters. Status quo will remain, they will remain choppy. What we have to wait for is the G20 and the Congress. Nothing will happen before that. Risks are too great, except if there is miscalculation and inadvertent firefight, or if the Western powers think it is in their strategic interest to incite China to a firefight. That is also possible. Time is too short for me to dwell on that very much more. I think I've said enough. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. You made some very interesting points. If I sum up what everyone has said, the first thing which comes out very clearly from all three speakers is that this amphibious operation is going to be one of the most complicated operations for which China is not fully prepared. Right? We saw what Professor Kuo said, gave that complicated picture of the, the landing sites, the mounting bases, the transit areas, and the landing sites, and how well they are defended. Admiral Chopra also pointed out the the invasion of France, or rather the Normandy landings took place over 30 to 50 kilometers. And here you're talking of 120 to 180 kilometers, where everything is transparent, right? But then that's only half the story. What about what do you do after you land on the beach? You have to go ahead. And those of you who studied Taiwan, one side of Taiwan is high altitude mountains. It comes down steep down to the coast. A lot of rivulets, a lot of streams. You have to go either up or north across the grain of the country. Is China prepared to do that? So you're going to do a complicated amphibious operations, and then you're going to do a complicated, land operations. And what, also came out, missiles are good demonstrators. They don't contribute to in a land battle. You could do shaping of the battle and all that. So this whole business of going through a complicated landing and making a success of it, I think is militarily, island too far. And the strait has widened, and I've written about it. So that's the point which I really wanted to make. And that came out from all three of you. Thank you. The second thing, an interesting aspect which Professor Kuo brought out is a time slot. Though Admiral Chopra said, look, we are going by the time slots laid by the Chinese, but the Chinese and the world are bound by a few time slots. And I think that's the important time slot which Professor Kuo put out, 23 to 27. And the issue of aging is important here. I will put it this way. The issue of aging which she's brought out is as per the current, estimates of China still having about 1.4 billion people. There are estimates by a Chinese who's a professor in US who feels that China is already 1.28 billion. It's gone down. The truth, as you know, could be somewhere in between. That means this society is already aged. Aged societies don't fight. They might be politicking, but fighting is difficult, right? Now you club this with what's happening in China, the kind of financial stress which it is going through, the kind of housing stress which it is going through, the kind of environmental problems it is going through. After all, last year, it had shut down for lack of energy. Already they have this problem for the past 6 days, and their water channels, their main water channels are dry. And if you think that this will vanish overnight and tomorrow China's economy will come bouncing back, I think we are off the mark. It's going to take 3 to 4 years for recovery. Now with all this, the time window for China to be able to, recover and mount an operation of this kind is going to be difficult. And add to what we all said, that Xi Jinping and his politics and the internal politics of China and the amount of risk. If you see the history of China, China has never taken a risk to go to war unless it has assured of victory. That's what happened in the Eastern Ladakh also. The day you got on to Kailash range, they tracked back 9 kilometers. Right? Here also they have done everything but put their feet in water. They have not wet their feet so far. You go back in time, Ussuri River against Russia. The day Russia did a firepower demonstration, they stepped back. Right? This is the history of China. So to that extent, political risk-taking is a big issue, and I don't know whether this will go through. But the relevant thing is the irrationality factor which comes in. Because China has always been irrational. If you go back in history and you see the 62 operation, China invaded India when it was itself going through a huge famine. It was a great famine. That's what they say. And 30 to 40 million people were dying, and Mao was invading India and making a name for himself. He almost did the same thing in Vietnam. And he sacrificed a lot of people to externalize and teach Vietnam a lesson. It's a different thing. What Vietnam taught them is not in their history books at all. So the irrationality factor is something which will have to come in. China doesn't become a superpower unless it shows a defeat of USA or by taking over Taiwan in part or damaging Taiwan substantially. Whether you acclaim it to be a superpower or not is not the relevant point. how he perceives himself to be a superpower to stay in power, which is the underlying principle of all the communists, is the operating issue. And that is what will probably at times dictate the irrationality of China and of declining power, right? I use this word very provocatively. Is China today a status quo power in terms of economy, or an ascending power, or a declining power? If all three options are open, but the trend lines as it is coming out are it could at best be a status quo power economically, or a declining power. For China to go up ahead from here is difficult. To quote a Chinese economist, he said the day when the Chinese economy is going to overtake the US economy is going farther away. And this, he said, not far back, 3 months back. Right? So there's a whole lot of issues on this thing. But the interesting point is, China has kept its options open in this entire game by almost making the median line irrelevant, by carrying out actions across the median line, right? It is forcing Taiwan to react almost on a daily basis. It might degenerate into a weekly basis, and it's getting closer. And that gives the opportunity for a surprise attack on Taiwan. Whether it's successful or not is a different story. The political conditions will dictate that. But it opens up the thing. And how long can Taiwan keep, just observing and preparing? So all these issues are there. If you put it in balance, what one sees is that the whole situation is going to be hazy for the next maybe 4 to 5 years. And after that, I think we will get into a certain element of certainty. Along with this haziness, the issue of our own situation across the LAC and in our vicinity is going to get heated up. We are going to have irritants. We already had these irritants. The Yuan Wang Fai or their activities across the LAC. These are all there. You can't wish them away. And we have to also understand, if China can't handle Taiwan or achieve its objectives in Taiwan, it has to turn to India, the next best option. Right? If it can't be a superpower, at least it should be an unquestioned regional power. And it can only be an unquestioned regional power if it puts down India militarily in some manner. Right? So these are the issues which are there. These are the things. But the last interesting point, which I'll leave and I probably will ask each of the speakers to elucidate. The point which Admiral Chopra made, USA has drawn out China with this Pelosi's trip. The question is, has China been exposed and overstretched to now that everyone knows its limitations? And the last point to add to this is, till date, China was an aided economy. Everyone in the West wanted China to succeed. And for the past 2 years, from an aided economy, China has become an opposed economy. Right? These are the headwinds which China is facing. But be that as it may, right? We will now, I'll, delve into a few questions. Yeah. Okay. I'll first shoot this question to Professor Kuo. You've given a good idea as to what China will do, what Taiwan will do to stave off China, right? I'll ask you a very simple question. What in your assessment, where in your assessment will you feel, or what are the actions or the markers you'll feel, where you feel China can do this and no more? And where do you feel it will get overstretched?
Pardon me, can I ask you to ask the question again? Because I didn't get the
Yeah,
question.
okay, fine. I'll ask you this question. Taiwan is well prepared to handle China. That is very apparent from what you shown to us. The question is, at what stage do you feel that China can do this much and no more? And what will your response be to that much to stave it off? And at what stage do you feel China will be overstretched that Taiwan can think of declaring independence?
Directly answering your question, if I got your question correctly, you all know that Chinese Central Military Commission announced this non-war military operation guidelines on June 14th and started to implement on the 15th of June. And what China has been doing, again, because we are looking at a very, this overcapacity of Chinese air and naval, forces. So what China has been doing since the announcement of this non-war military operation guidelines, I mean, those aircraft and vessels cruising around Taiwan is not a single case. They've been doing the same thing to Japan from mid-June all the way to July. So my assessment is China will continue to have more military appearances, not only surrounding Taiwan, but also in Japan and surrounding Japan and also South Pacific. I especially have to mention South Pacific because after China finished military preparation in South China Sea, all these artificial islands, there are two knots of sea and communication in Indo-Pacific. One is at South China Sea, the other is at South Pacific. That's the reason why China intended to sign this security agreement with Solomon Islands. And they will do so with Kiribati in the near future. And second of all, I do not think, I mean, Taiwan is a battlefield, as other speakers been saying. Taiwan as a battlefield is too complicated. I do not think military China could easily swallow Taiwan. Yeah, but by doing so much, it is not real preparation for direct invasion. But to my assessment, it's more like to crash. I mean, if Chinese aircraft and vessels regularly, create this kind of new normal to exercise surrounding Taiwan, they could easily crash our military morale. Very easy. I mean, if US continue to have this kind of mutual understanding with China, allowing Chinese vessels to come so close to Taiwan, China could easily crash our military morale. I think it's the most dangerous part. And the third one I want to add, because I didn't have time to finish my presentation, but this is important. The Beidaihe meeting of Chinese top leaders, it actually finished earlier than we expected. They started from August 1st. And then we expected to, they will finish around 20th of August, but it finished 12th. And guess what, this kind of fast termination of top leaders meeting at Beidaihe, implying Xi Jinping received, of course, Xi Jinping received challenges from other top leaders, but not fears. Take all those problems and crises into consideration, as General Shankar just mentioned. Those debt crisis, these abandoned housing projects, the lockdown of Shanghai and other major cities, and not to mention Xi Jinping messed up basically relations with Japan, with the United States, and also Taiwan. With so much trouble, how could Xi Jinping, went through Beidaihe meetings so fast and in one piece? So this is a very important indicator for us. And lastly, for Taiwan, I believe Xi Jinping will again not using military measure as the major approach to solve Taiwan problem, but to they have this kind of weird name for their strategy. It's called the overall strategy in solving Taiwan problems for Chinese Communist Party in the new era. So this overall strategy is basically talking about like political, economic, and societal measures to integrate Taiwan into Chinese system. And that sounds scary to us. So that's my reply to your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let me ask you a small question regarding the Bidahe meeting. You say it's finished in 6 days. I agree, it's a little too fast, but nothing has come out of it. But the only thing which has come out of it is Xi Jinping has gone to Liaoning and Li Keqiang has gone to Shenzhen.
Yeah.
Do you read anything out of this?
A lot of speculation on these, two top leaders trip, one to the north and then to visit the War Memorial Museum. The other went down to south, standing in front of Deng Xiaoping's statue and saying China will continue open and reform. Trigger a lot of speculation, but I can tell you, we are certain Xi Jinping is turning Chinese Communist Party from collective leadership to a one-man party, because far away from Beidaihe, Xi Jinping already put important people in the important position of Chinese Communist Party, including the Central Organization Agency, the Propaganda Agency, Li Shulei from the CCP Party School, to the Central Organization Agency, and also Chen Xi as well. So, Xi Jinping is trying to hollowize this standing committee. So, whoever will list in the standing committee in the 20th Party Congress end of this year, it doesn't matter. Because what Xi Jinping is trying to do is to use the party machine to replace the decision-making function of the standing committee. So, all these evidences, even from Beidaihe, and the 2 trips you mentioned, General Shankar mentioned, those are symbolic only. Yeah, but not the real operation for Chinese Communist Party after the 20th Party Congress.
Thanks a lot for your valuable insight. My next question is to General Prakash Menon. So we've heard a lot in the news about the naval blockade which is being attempted by China, because this is a very loose blockade and actually a one-sided blockade. Considering the fact that in real life situation, all other navies will react, what will be the effect of a blockade of this nature in actual ops? And do you think it's feasible? And if a naval blockade is not feasible, will Taiwan ever be taken over?
Yeah, I think, the classified as a blockade was really stretching the term a little too much, because there were designated areas which were actually the shipping was warned about and flights were warned about. So it was not a complete blockade. There were enough. Obviously, the ships had to reroute. It costs more time, more money, insurance rates, and the rest of it. So to say it was a blockade really is stretching the term. So first point. Second point is, it should be very clear to us that the days of a blockade succeeding and following it up with amphibious assault in the manner that we are talking about is something which probably requires to be kept in the realm of military imagination, and time for that is well past because of the reaction that it will actually invite. And as we all know, the more the Chinese actually dance and play around the islands, they're also leaking a lot of information about their own to people who are watching it, because everything today can be monitored. So the necessity of a blockade does not really arise. And if it has to, then it would actually invite a sort of international reaction, which will be much beyond Taiwan. And that is where China will have to be prepared for it. And that, I think, China is not prepared. So to think that it can sort of blockade the whole island and then launch an amphibious assault is actually just the realm of imagination. So I think we should just about see, nothing is impossible. A crazy guy can do anything, attempt to do it, but that doesn't mean that he's likely to succeed. So why would the Chinese do such things? What is the purpose of their doing it when they know the risks are so much? So I think we can actually think the idea here is of psychological intimidation. That is the message for Taiwan. What message does it sending to the rest might be different, because the rest might be getting together to make sure that the Chinese are taken care of if they ever go beyond a particular point. So they are inviting the cohesiveness of the opposition when they should actually be dividing it. And I think in strategic terms, that is the greatest loss for China's reaction for what it has done.
Thank you, sir. I think you made a valid point. Like Russia united Europe, China has united the South Pacific area and the ASEAN and gravitated it towards USA. And that's important because I remember when I did a course in USA, it was a multinational course where people from 50 countries were there. I had a guy who was doing it from Indonesia, someone from Malaysia, and someone from Singapore and those countries. I always thought that USA had a good hold of them, but in the last decade they were drifting away. And now, with the kind of reactions which are coming out from Indonesia and Malaysia buying JF-70 Tejas in over and above, not JF-17s, is a great indicator as to which side this part of the world is moving. I'll get the question on with Sir Admiral Chopra, sir. The question to you is, and it's a very intriguing question, and which you have said in the passing, but I'll elucidate it. The question is, the Indian Foreign Minister has been forthright in clarifying India's stand on various issues. He's also been very clear on the Sino-Indian relations. But if you see, he's not been very forthcoming on India's stand on Taiwan. Right? And whether he validates the Chinese claims on Taiwan or not. Now, where do we stand? Do we take our relations forward with Taiwan? Or do we, this is $1 million question, because I think unless we get out of our own gray zone, and we've got ourselves into our own gray zone on this issue, we're going nowhere.
Why are you giving me these tricky questions in the first place?
The whole idea is to...
Well, I think in a democracy like ours, there are various contending points of view, as there should be. And I don't think the Indian polity as a whole has taken a sort of collective choice between which way we should go. I think as a nation, we are evolving, and I think our policies are evolving. And the present state of hedging, actually, to my mind, displays somewhat a sense of confusion amongst in which way to actually go. There is a school which believes that we must be strategically ambiguous, and we must never side or align with any point of view, classic non-alignment, issue by issue, and perhaps that is called strategic autonomy, not sure. The second is that we should, keep our doors open to China, Global South, Pan-Asian, all those, ideological positions are there, and there's a lot of support for them. And the third is those who believe that these are repressive, dictatorial, authoritarian regimes which are a threat to India, and they must be countered without being too squeamish about it. I've laid down for you now these three schools. Now, which one the government follows will, of course, be based on many more inputs than I have. But to my mind, China is a real threat to India, a territorial threat, in ways other powers have not been. Not America, not Russia, not anybody else. And therefore, when we look at China, we need to look at it from a very long-term point of view. As you pointed out, we are natural competitors in Asia. Perhaps the power equation, relative differential, limits our choices to some degree. I don't think I'm sure, I'm certain the government has all the options being studied very greatly and in detail. But we have chosen at the moment to be slightly reticent about some of China's actions. And from my understanding, there would be good reason to do so, given certain input which you and I may not have. So I would go along with saying that at this moment, we've come out clearly on some issues, we have been hedging on some, we have kept silent on the others. And hopefully there are reasons for it. So I would think that it's difficult for a forum like ours to sort of get a sense of what exactly are the reasons why a government does or says or doesn't say what it does. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, sir. I think you summed it up well. We had this difficult choice to make even during the Ukraine war. We've had this difficult choice to make even now. It tells us something. It tells us how we need to build up our own national power, and it tells us that we are not doing it in the right direction. I think that's the larger message which I wanted to draw out from you, which I think you brought. I agree with you that, given the state we are in, we probably cannot enunciate our ideas very clearly and openly, right? But I think one thing which we need to take home from here is that if you want real strategic autonomy or independence, whichever way you call it, you have to build up those elements of national power which give you that autonomy. And the question is, are we doing that? And I leave it at that. Right. I'll now switch to Dr. Ko. The point is that, there are two aspects to invasion of Taiwan. The first aspect is the physical invasion of Taiwan. Okay, you invaded Taiwan. I'm talking as a Chinese, and I've taken over Taiwan. What do I do with 23 million people there? Right? And these people are those who never for one day been under the communist rule. They have a better form of life. Their GDP is 2.5 to 3 times our, per capita than the Chinese. They are more used to a more democratic way of life. They had a tough time under the Chiang Kai-shek regime, the Kuomintang. But today with the PDP, they're going somewhere else. And amidst all this, we also heard one ambassador talk of re-education. He said, look, when we take over Taiwan, we're going to re-educate them. As if Taiwan is, some kind of a Xinjiang kind of a situation. I'd like you to dilate on these issues, Professor Ko, because what matters ultimately is people. And people are something which even the People's Republic of China is aware of.
Thank you for the, it's a little bit difficult question. And the statement from Chinese ambassador to France Lusaye, it's an unbelievable statement, especially for democracies, for this kind of re-education. But let me assure you that, first of all, as I mentioned just now, Taiwan is a battlefield. It's way too complicated. You are far more military, you have far more military expertise than I am. But you all know Taiwan is a battlefield. It's really difficult, very complicated, for China to swallow. Even in the years coming, for China is still too difficult. Number two, economically, people, I don't know why people have this kind of misunderstanding or misperception that Taiwan economically rely on China very much. It is not true. We've been testing China since 2016. If China will terminate this ECFA, economic cooperation framework with Taiwan, when DPP returned to power, President Tsai Ing-wen. And it's been more than 6 years. China doesn't dare to terminate ECFA with Taiwan. Reason very simple. Superficially, it looks like Taiwan depending on China economically very much, but the number is very simple. More than 65% of Taiwan's export to China is intermediate goods, and more than 80% of China's export to Taiwan is end products. So it's very easy for Taiwan to switch our trade destination for end products, but it is almost impossible for China to have replacement for intermediate goods, especially in machine tools. So, economically or industrially, we have been helping China. So it's the other way around. And socially, that is funny. It's we are teaching them. We have more than a million Taiwanese businessmen doing business, running factories, teaching their people in mainland China. Not the other way around. Yeah. So not to mention, General Shankar mentioned about this democratic way of life. Chinese people has been learning, a great deal of Taiwanese way of life for the past decades, and I believe you will continue with so much people exchange, cross strait, and that's regardless of what Xi Jinping's, this ideological fundamentalist would like to do. It doesn't matter. So that's my answer to you. And I just have a question to all of you. If any one of you could, I just been puzzling, among all the democracies, I believe India has the best qualification to do so-called playing Taiwan card against China. India, comparing to countries like democracies like Japan or Korea, India economically rely on China very little, almost none. And second of all, those two countries, India and China, are at competitive position in international politics, economy, and also strategic competition with China too. And not to mention, India has a territorial dispute with China, seriously. Yeah, and most importantly, you don't share common values with China and the way of life, democratic way of life. So I'm not government official. I'm not trying to do propaganda.
Yeah, it's okay, fine, go ahead.
Yeah, your country and my country can actually do a lot together. Especially, I mentioned Taiwanese government has been decided to concentrate highly of high-tech and semiconductor industry in Taiwan. And I've been talking to lots of Indian professors or experts. Yeah, they also told me India has been paying very high attention to Taiwan's high-tech industry development. So besides the data I just mentioned, in the coming 4 years, TSMC is going to set up 18 new factories. Another striking fact is this February, our government decided to open up 6 colleges of semiconductor in 6 national universities, including mine. And September, I mean next month, the new semester, these 6 colleges of semiconductor is going to operate. And then we recruit lots of international students. And you guess what? 0 from India.
Okay, I'll take this question on.
Yeah.
So the first thing, you give it to me. I'm in IIT Madras. Give me an email. I'll take it on, and we'll open this channel with Sun Yat-sen. Okay, and I'll take this on with my director.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the first thing. In fact, I will put it this way: if you want a reciprocal arrangement with Sun Yat-sen University and IIT Madras, we'll take it on.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah,
with a proper MOU. So that's the first thing I'm going to answer. The second thing is that you made a mention as to what can we do to, further cooperation between India and Taiwan, right? I'll direct this question to General Prakash Menon. But having said that, before he answers, right, I just today written an article on this. And I have given it to the Financial Express here, and I have requested them to give it to also a Taiwanese media platform. I'll send it to you. If you can get it published there, it will be okay. You might find it a bit radical. But having said that, General Menon, sir, your views on how do we increase the equation between India and Taiwan?
First, let me tell you that there is an inherent hesitation about expanding India's relationships with Taiwan because of the sensitivities of our relations with China. This is, I think, embedded in the MEA and in the political psyche. It's been there for some time. It might be changing over a period of time, but that hesitation, I think, is there. The question is, how does India make this change? How does it actually expand those relationships? One of the first things which you would have probably noticed is that India had for some time now stopped using the one China phrase in any of the agreements or statements which we have, when we have joint statements with China. That itself is a switch. But we haven't gone the whole hog of trying to actually leverage the potential which Taiwan can offer us, or we can offer Taiwan. And my only reason for that, which I can give, is that there is hesitancy. And I think we need to break out of it. We need to actually make it, we don't have to poke somebody in the face, but India needs to move on from where it was. How that is to be done is a matter of diplomacy and a foreign policy maneuver. But I would agree that we haven't done enough and we should do more.
Thank you, sir. That's the thing, that we need to do more. And actually, this ties up with what Admiral Chopra was saying, that we need to be a little clear as to which direction you have to go. If we are clear as to which direction we have to go, I think the rest is a matter of QED. But I'll leave this at this. We'll go back to China, because this is something which many people have asked and it's come up. Now, at one point of time, say 2 years back, we saw China was at the at the perch of globalization. Now, 2 years down the line, with all these instances, China is getting more and more isolated. And it doesn't have an ally. The Russia-China relationship, I think, is at best transactional. And it is pitching itself into a corner. Where do you think, what would be the game plan of this whole story? Admiral Chopra, sir, again, it's a bit of maybe a difficult question, but I'd request you to take a shot at it.
I'm glad to on this one. There is a general sort of feeling because of Sun Tzu maybe, that the Chinese think 1,000 years ahead and are great strategic masters. But everything that they have done in the recent past does not indicate, at least to me, that much thought has been given to what they will find themselves with respect to the world. It started, Xi Jinping is the front of it, and therefore it's almost like an emperor without clothes. In the sense, let me just make a nautical pitch on this. You know, China is so dependent on its global trade, its exports and imports, its energy security. The whole of the Chinese manufacturing factory depends on its ability to find markets for its finished goods, get resources for its manufacturing and the energy security. This requires a huge maritime infrastructure that it has developed. But apart from the West Pacific, the Chinese have no capability to fight a maritime conflict in any other patch of ocean in the world. You cannot be a great power if you can't do that. The Russians realized this, and Gorshkov built up in 30 years a Soviet fleet which was there in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, and elsewhere. China, in its rush to be a great power, has, just gone ahead with the narrative without actually having the potential to do so. Imagine if there was a firefight which started in South China Sea or off Taiwan between China and the Allies. How vulnerable Chinese shipping becomes all over the world. In seas and ports in the Mediterranean, in the Atlantic, elsewhere. China just doesn't have the capacity to fight on the Western Pacific. The Japanese did, as far as the Pacific is concerned. The Russians, Soviets certainly did. And they were on the verge of trying to become great powers. China has none of this. China's whole ascent has been due to a sort of communist cloistered capitalism, where it provided investors with an ambience of low labor, low land costs, no trade unions, no media, no courts in which to manufacture. And they did. And China became rich. Its entire future, as you very correctly said, depends on this being brought back to the status quo and being an assisted economic power. And therefore, to jump a little bit, I do believe that both on Taiwan and on Ukraine, Chinese have been cautious and now cautious even in Taiwan, because they realize that if this goes too far, they will burn their bridges, and the chance of any rapprochement with Western powers, including the US, to bring back that economic thriving will then be out of its reach, and it will become a declining power. I'm sure this is being debated in the CCP. So to my view, to answer your question, this whole thing of this narrative started in 2008 of how China is going to go until 2049 is a false narrative. It's fraying now. Chinese dream is becoming a reality and may well become a nightmare. And Chinese belligerence is not paid off. So I don't think there was any method in it. I personally believe it is not personalities, whether Napoleon or Hitler or Xi Jinping. And they just sort of take everybody along a certain path, which may not be the best path for the country at all. I think that's what happened. I'm not a great believer in this great Chinese long-term strategy, from their heritage also.
I think you made a very, very, very valid point, sir. All of us, we've all believed in the narrative. In fact, I've heard General Prakash Menon also say, look, the Chinese think long-term. When he did this, we all heard this when we were in NDC. There's been talking, this is an open thing. But just think, look at their history. Did they really think long-term? Did Mao really think long-term when he killed 40 million of their people and drove them to cannibalism? Did Deng Xiaoping, their great reformer, really think when he brought this one-child policy in and persisted with it for 30, 40 years? Is Xi Jinping and gang really thinking ahead when they make this narrative of this great China dream and the great China superpower from 2049, when by 2050, it is a stated fact that they're going to be down to 1 million in population? And this is not something which, in fact, many of us have not read China well. I mean, I'm talking in a bit of a hindsight and retrospect. The other day, I was reading a World Bank report of 2012, and it was a joint report between the World Bank and the State Council of China. And the State Council of China is a very powerful organization in China. And their report says this, all these issues, all the ills which are now coming out. One of the major recommendations they said was seek mutual beneficial relations with the rest of the world. And they've done exactly opposite that. They said strengthen your market economy. Xi Jinping has done exactly opposite that. Right? They said, look, you're going to have an aging economy. And this is the statistics of your aging economy. And this is what you have to do. And they've done exactly opposite that. And what's important and what is very, very thing is, and this report was given out in 2012. And 2013, Xi Jinping took over and he took this report, saw it and trashed it. And that's what this all come about. In fact, this is the fundamental argument which I put forth in an article. It's going to come out in the Sunday Guardian tomorrow, right? With this, I think I'll rest the case. I'll not I think we have had a very, very interesting talk on China. For the first time in all these days, we've seen a different China emerging. It's not that, I mean, one of the articles I concluded by saying China is not a great fire-eating dragon, but a sick lizard. And that's what I see emerging, right? I'll leave it at this. I thank all the panelists for their views, and I provoked them into giving some unorthodox ideas and unorthodox views. And I know I pose tough questions, but that's how it should be. And not believe the Chinese narrative as it comes. And I also thank all the audience for all the questions. I've not taken all the questions on the way they've put it, but I've clubbed the questions and put it across to the speakers. Thank you, sirs. And with this, I'll hand you over to General Gautam Murthy.
Oh, what a fantastic webinar. Thank you all very much on behalf of Team CASA. I want to especially thank Dr. Eugen Ko, General Prakash Menon, Admiral Anil Chopra, and our moderator, General Shankar. This is one of the best webinars that we have held on CASA. Very deep questions, and actually, we should now change the topic of this to a reality check on China, which is what this webinar, the conclusion that we get. Thank you very much, General Dipinder, Mr. Madhavan Shankar, and Barnali for your support, and above all, thank all the participants who spent the valuable time on a Saturday evening to be with us. We will be making a short summary of this. The YouTube recording of this will also soon be available. And we look forward to all of you attending our next webinar. Thank you all very much. Goodbye, good night, and Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.